when we talk about origins and where people originate from, rarely do we discuss where the we begins and where the we ends, as far as who we associate ourselves with, and what scale of time are we talking about. If we're talking about Europeans and where Europeans and the European diaspora of today belong, the first immediate logical answer might be that all Europeans should return to Europe. But how long do we have to stay in a place before we belong there? Or rather, for how long can we stay away from our homeland before it's no longer our homeland? And I ask this question as a European by blood living in foreign soil in Australia. And I'd like to just compare Australia with America, which is easy to do, similar sort of stories, but also with Iceland. Now, if we were to ask a European if a European Australian like myself was European, they might be inclined to say no, because I wasn't born there and I haven't set foot in Europe. But if I were to ask a Aboriginal Australian if I was Australian, they'd probably say no, I'm European. And if someone were to ask me what I am, I'd say it's very hard to answer. My first word I always say is European, because that is what I'm made of. So I always try and say European, Australian, or something of the like. But I never say I'm Australian first, because although I was born here, and my family's been here for several generations, I still don't feel like it's okay to say that I'm from here. But it makes me wonder, how long do we stay, or how long do we have to stay before we are from this place? And when I say I want to compare it to Iceland, I see Iceland as a pretty similar situation. The only difference is there was no original people in Iceland before it was settled by Europeans. Separate landmass to Europe. It's not attached to the mainland. It's not even on the same tectonic plate. So in what way is Iceland a part of Europe other than its people? And by that type of criteria, it's no more European than Australia or America or South Africa for that matter. And as far as I'm aware, Icelanders are all considered European, and there's no question about it. Similar type thing with Ireland as well, I guess. Although Ireland's a lot closer to the mainland of Europe. You could walk there in an ice age. And it's on the same tectonic plate at least. Iceland is a little bit closer again than Australia and America. America. But other than relative proximity, I don't see there being any difference. And if anything, given that Iceland was founded or settled some 1,000 years ago, and America a few hundred years ago, and Australia only a couple of hundred years ago, one could argue that the European Australians are more European than Icelanders, because we have a more recent connection to our European ancestors, our true European mainland ancestors. I don't think this is the case, but it raises an interesting perspective. And how far back do we go to say that that's where we're from? Because if we're willing to entertain the idea that Europeans are descended from Neanderthals, which I am. I don't know this. I believe this. What I've researched and read or heard all seems like a pretty compelling idea. And if we consider the Neanderthals to be European indigenous people, or indigenous people of Europe rather, that would be an argument for Europeans belonging in Europe. But where did Neanderthals come from? Mainstream science theory would have us believe that all people of today have descended from Africans and migrants from Africa. Modern scientific theory says that modern humans have mixed with the Neanderthals, and not that anyone is more, or rather that doesn't identify or acknowledge that Europeans and Neanderthals are as similar as they are, or as we are, I should say. And a better way of saying that would be, it seems like a cover-up to try and disconnect Europeans from the indigenous people, the Neanderthals of Europe, to try and discredit the European claim to Europe. That's what I believe. And that goes against the modern mainstream science theory. Whether or not that's true, or whether or not anyone else acknowledges that, the mainstream science theory still claims that Neanderthals have come from Africa. But as far as I'm aware, there's no evidence of Neanderthals in Africa. And if there is, it's a recent migration too, and there is older evidence of Neanderthals in Europe. And that's the thing. When we're saying where something comes from, we can only go by our oldest evidence. And I believe that there may be some evidence to suggest that Neanderthals may have even come from east of the Ural Mountains. I can't remember where I've come across this. I'm going to have to go back and try and find the reference to this. But if that's the case, could be true, does that not make Neanderthals Asian? And then by default Europeans are actually Asian? I don't believe this either, but it raises a similar type of question. How far back do we go to say this is our origin point? Because we have no evidence of an original, definitive beginning to any human species or subspecies. So we need to agree on something when we're having these types of conversations. Some interesting ideas I've heard recently as well as an out of Australia myth. And the idea that humans originated in Australia and have migrated outwards from there and thereforth. There's some interesting ideas there. I don't believe it to be true, simply because I don't buy into the idea that we all are the same and that we've all come from one ancestor. And I think it's bullshit to try and make a claim to the out of anywhere for the collective whole. Maybe some have come from here and some from there. But what I have found interesting in hearing about this out of Australia idea is talking about the Australian Aborigines, the native Australians. When we say native, how far back do we go? Was there someone here before them? Did they steal the land from someone? Who knows? I'm not going to get into that now though. But interestingly, Neanderthals and Aboriginal Australians have more in common with each other than either have in common with Africans. And the out of Africa theory, or myth or hoax if you will, would have us believe that Australians left Africa somewhere between 50 and... There's evidence of Aboriginals in Australia 70,000 years ago. So they were trying to have us believe that 70,000 years ago, Australians left Africa and were isolated for 70,000 years, and somewhere along the way Europeans came out of Africa and adapted with a lightning effect of the skin, and within a few tens of thousands of years they became adapted to the colder climates of Europe. Which the recent crap with this cheddar man trying to make out like Britons were black until agriculture came along, and that's why we turned white, which is a load of shit as well. But the Aboriginal Australians are a testament against the out of Africa hoax. So there's reason. That's why I started looking into that. Also the fact that it's just obvious that we are not Africans. Not any recent time anyway. Maybe if we go back millions and millions and millions of years, but if we go back far enough, apparently it was all one landmass anyway, Gondwana land, and if that's the case, what's the point? How far back do we go? But back to the Aboriginal Australians again. What's interesting about them also, not only having this commonality with Neanderthals, is that the Aboriginal Australians' darkness of the skin is quite recessive compared to, say, the Africans. If you mix subspecies or race, or whatever word you want to use, Africans and Europeans, the offspring are subject to a darkening effect. Whereas with the Aboriginals and the Europeans, the effect is the other way. It's actually lightening. So within 3 generations of mixed breeding with Aboriginal Australians and Europeans, it's actually quite hard to tell the difference between a mixed European Aboriginal and a purebred European. I am not a mixed European and Aboriginal, by the way. I'm quite certain of that. I can trace all my ancestors in Australia back to Europe beforehand, so there's no question about that. And not that I'd be ashamed of it anyhow. You are what you are, and you have to deal with what you've got to do. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to consider, especially if we want to entertain the idea of a link between Neanderthals and Aboriginal Australians. I'm not saying that they're same. I think maybe there's a common ancestor that both have come from, maybe in the Asia region. But I don't actually know. But the Aboriginal Australians, have all the traits of Neanderthals. The difference is the skin colour. And the idea of a Neanderthal moving, say, to Australia and then darkening over some tens of thousands of years due to the harsh sun, that is believable in my mind. And that is an idea I'm willing to entertain. But then the question is why? The whole migration to Australia doesn't make much sense, especially if you don't have a global understanding of where the land is on the planet, because it'd be a great accident just to end up in Australia without knowing it's there in the first place. So I'm personally of the inclined to believe rather, that civilizations of sorts have come and go for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years before. There's more and more evidence every day of ancient civilizations that science can't explain. It'd just be good if scientists just admitted that they don't know what the fuck they're talking about and go back to the old-fashioned way of just working things out and saying, we don't know, this is what we do know, rather than trying to speculate too much. I should probably take my own advice too, I guess. But yeah, I'm going to leave it there because getting a little bit off topic, but I think they're all relative points when we wonder where we come from and where we're going and where we should be now. I'll leave it there for now.